Hey, what's up everybody? In this crash course tutorial for Shadows of Esteren by Studio Agate, I'm going to go over drive, determination points, and your character's focus. Now before we get into it, I want to mention a couple things. First, this is an expansion rule from Book 3 Dearg. And second, this is a part 2 of a two-part crash course about that expansion rule. So make sure you watch the narrative arc part 1 before you watch this, so this will make more sense. All right, let's get into it.
Cybernation Uncensored.
All right. If you checked out that narrative arc video, then this fourth page to your character sheet should already be familiar to you. Basically, it's to get some of the details that bring the focus to life, including your narrative arc, your new trait drive, and the determination points, advantages, all that stuff. So in that video, I go over most of that. In this one, I want to complete how to calculate your drive, get those determination points, and then play out the focus with all the players. So first, let's get into drive, passion, and determination. Again, you might remember this from that narrative arc video. Let's get a little more detailed into it. Like I mentioned in that, your passion is, it's basically one of your faults, and it's based on your combativeness rating. So your passion is going to be equal to your combativeness rating. So you take that plus your determination points, which I'll go over in just a moment, how you get those points, and that equals your drive. Your drive is basically a new trait. Okay, so in character creation, make sure you watch that video too. In character creation, you basically come up with some traits like consciousness, instinct, your trauma, and they each kind of influence the character in different ways. Again, make sure you check out the character creation video so that makes a little more sense to you. Well, drive is a new trait that goes hand in hand with those traits. Now, this drive isn't necessarily covered in character creation. This more comes to life in campaigns because it's either going to play into the narrative arc and be part of a particular campaign, or it's going to be part of just general history of the character. I'll get into that in a moment when we dive a little deeper into focuses. But for now, let's just get back to this in determining what drive is. So you basically take your passion plus your determination points, and that gives you your drive statistic. And that stat, you run that the same way you would do any type of skill check, basically. I go over the core mechanics in that core mechanics crash course, so watch that so you get a better idea of how that works. But ultimately, you're taking your drive plus a 1d10, and you're trying to match or beat a threshold set by the game leader. Now, let me just read a little bit about this, about drive, so it makes a bit more sense on exactly how drive is used, because it works a little different. It's a little nuanced. It's interesting how it plays in, and I really like it. I think it leans and promotes heavy role play. So yeah, let me just read this a little bit because I think it'll make better sense. Let's see here. So drive ranges from 1 to 10 and follows the rules of test rolls, like I just said, described in my core mechanics crash course. As long as the actions of the PC go towards the accomplishment of their personal quest, no roll is necessary. However, if they try to ignore it, they will have to fight that which obsesses them, the same way they would struggle against their faults related to their ways. On such occasions, the PC will have to overcome their drive lest they pursue their quest without paying heed to the consequences. So it's basically, taking the general, well, first off, it is a fault in a sense that, it's overwhelming, and you're competing against your drive when you make decisions against that character's general purpose, right? So each character is going to have, and you set this kind of in session 0, you set this in your narrative arc. So again, watch those videos about character creation, about the narrative arc. I mentioned about session 0s. I also have a GM tips series where I go over session 0s. That could be very helpful as well. But ultimately, drive, as you see, it kind of works in a reverse way. You're not using that check to complete a set skill, you're using that to check to see if you can go against the character's typical obsessiveness, right? Or what they're obsessed about, or what drives them, right? So it's like when a character's about to make a decision and it goes against what their main purpose is in life or in that campaign as it relates to whether their narrative arc or their history, etc. If it goes against it, then they have to check. They have to check that drive and see, can they go against their drive, or do they fail? And you can come up with your own ways that you work those critical successes and failures. I go over that a little bit in the core mechanics video, but make it your own. As a game leader here, there's no right or wrong way to push that drive narrative, and also to push that drive result, depending on what they roll. So have fun with that, but just kind of take into account the fact that it works in a way that goes against what the character is trying to do, if that goes against their main drive or purpose. So let's get a little bit into those determination points, because that's what's going to make up the drive, because you're going to combine that with the passion, right? So here's some advice on distributing and evolution of these points, and then it gives some things here. Before I kind of get into these, I do want to mention that you leave this up to the player for the most part. I think the player should be able to look at their character, kind of determine the amount of points based on these things, these concepts, and other things. You can think outside the box here, and you'll see when I get into it in a minute. But the player can come up with this. Hey, I think my character, the way I've been playing it, the way it's been going, they should have the full max 5 determination points, or only a couple because of this and that. I kind of went against this and the way that this played out because I was morally torn and I made this decision which is less towards my drive. So I think I would have maybe just a couple determination points, right? So the player will kind of decide that based on how they've been playing their character. However, the game leader always has last say. So you're going to have that discussion between you and the player. As the game leader and the player, discuss that, but let the player kind of lead that discussion, what they think their character deserves, and then you kind of weigh in your opinion and make that final decision. But ultimately, if the player portrays their character as driven and committed throughout their focus, this can be reflected with maximum determination points. Determination points can evolve. Players can lose them and earn them throughout the campaign, depending on if they go against or with their focus and their drive. In a particular case, the leader may also earn 1 or even 2 extra determination points above the maximum, depending on if they're really pushing that drive. You can see here, are they deciding to strengthen the relation to mental troubles and to what their focus is basically trying to say that their history was. And this will make more sense when I get into focuses, because it basically is, like I said, pulling the history and the session 0 into the current campaign, and you're going to play that out with the players. You're going to play out that history. So I'll get into that in just a moment. But ultimately, I wanted to express this, that you're going to get these determination points based on how you played the character, leaning into the focus. Is it reflected by them really using their drive to be focused on their focus, or are they getting kind of sidetracked? You can kind of gauge how many determination points they get in that case. And like I said, you can go above it, above the max if the game leader determines. And that just shows once again that not everything is set in stone. Make the game your own. Don't worry about fitting exact by these examples. Have it make sense, and then relate that to your current campaign and players and characters. But let's get into those determination points and how you get, like it says, experience points from it, and then some advantages, because you can get a couple advantages here too. So once you determine, key moments where like they leaned into that focus or their drive in their history, and you figure out how many determination points they have in its relation to that campaign, right? You see here, 1 determination point equals 10 experience points. The second one, another 10 experience points. The third one, another 10 experience points. The 4th determination point, you end up picking up an advantage from a list of advantages. The 5th one, you get a second advantage. So you can end up with 2 advantages. And then it lists a handful of advantages there. Very similar to character creation when you have advantages and disadvantages. These are some additional advantages that you can choose from based on your determination points. Now, these additional advantages can't be used in character creation. That character creation video where I go over advantages and disadvantages, those advantages are listed in the main book. These advantages are specific to your focus and to this campaign, whether Dearg or whatever campaign you want to relate focuses and narrative arcs to. But ultimately, you see here as each determination point, you get more experience points, they stack, and then once you get up to 4th and 5th determination points, you get to pick from the list of advantages. All right, let's get into characteristics of focus, because this is where it really comes to life. A focus is, going to lean into three possible objectives here, and it lists some here. The first one I've kind of already named, and I go over that in deep detail in that other first part video to this, which is exploring a narrative arc. So when you have a focus, basically, it's kind of like, it's different than a typical campaign because it's more of a flashback, it's more of a focus, your relation to your narrative arc. As it says here, you might be exploring that narrative arc. You might be fleshing out a PC history, as you see here is another possible objective, which you might be bringing some of those session zero life path stories to life, in this case, as it relates to the current campaign, or not. It might just be a flashback scenario that maybe doesn't relate to the current campaign, but it just fleshes out some of the PC's history, not associated with the narrative arc to the campaign. The last here is the other objective is possibly earning determination and experience points. So maybe you're playing out some of those past scenes where you showed how you were leaning into the focus, and maybe the whole purpose of that focus is to get those determination points that show how that happened. So you see how that can go down, and it's going to relate to something I'm going to get into here in a moment, because we're going to talk about what happens with the other players when you get into this focus, and then also suspense and tragedy, because it plays different than a normal campaign, like I mentioned, because this is something that technically has already happened in the character's life. So obviously, like, the character can't die during a flashback or a focus, right? During a deep dive into their narrative arc or the PC's history, they can't die or have something so detrimental to the current state of the character. So that's where it's going to kind of lean into suspense and tragedy and storytelling, but I'll explain that in just a moment. Let's first go over the other players. The first thing I want to mention is, as you're getting these experience points, as this particular character is the focus, right? Focus of this. The other player characters should get some experience points too. You basically just take that, and whatever the lead focus is getting rewarded by experience points, just take that in half, rounded up, it suggests. And then you reward that to the other characters, because the idea here is when you dive into this focus and you play out this focus scenario with the lead character, the other characters are off, at that moment doing their own flashback things, right? Like, this is a flashback in history. Maybe the other characters are off doing something else, in which case they should get some experience points. So you take whatever that lead is getting from that focus, and you take that in half, rounded up, you just give that to the other characters, so at least they get some experience points and somewhat keep up with that lead. Keeping in mind that, yeah, the lead's going to get much more because they are the focal point of the focus, but each character is also going to get their own focus at different times of the campaign or in separate campaigns. You should cycle through each player's character and kind of give them their own spotlight, their own moment, right, to play out this stuff. So that's how you kind of incorporate the other players when it comes to experience points. But let's get into how they actually play into the focus when it plays out. So there's lead, supports, and extras. So a lead is the PCs whose story or narrative arc will be explored during the focus. Like I said, they're the main focal point of the focus. The other players now, they're going to assume, okay, my characters back then or at that moment during that history or focal deep dive of the narrative arc, at that time they're off doing their own adventure, whatever they're doing, and they can make up their own stories if they want. That's always fun. Maybe it's a little something for session zero. Maybe it's something they're off doing that will then be the next focus or something, right? But during that time, all the players now, they're going to play extras, followers, pre-made characters, inhabitants of the Valley of Dearg in this example here, because this is from the Dearg campaign or whatever campaign you're doing. They're going to play supporting characters, NPCs, basically. So you're going to kind of lay out what this arc is. You're going to, if it's the narrative arc, or if it's going to be a focal point of the history of the character, like I said, or a moment of getting those determination points and experience points. And once you lay out, that sort of scenario and you dive into that, you're going to first talk to your other players and line up. Look, here's the pre-made characters that are involved in this story. And you do this aside from the main focal point player. Let me add that. You want the main player, who is the focal point, the lead, right, of this focus, to not hear you discuss with the other players what they're going to play. So you talk to the other players separately. Hey, these are the NPCs I need you to play. These are the supporting acts, the followers, the extras, or if you will. This is the storyline we're doing. This is the focal point. This is what we're doing. This is the story we're telling. And you give them the gist of it so their characters can implement and be role played properly into that focal story and for the main lead. And, most players should have fun with this. I personally love this stuff because it's, like I said, with Shadows of Esteren, it's so crunch light and so role-play heavy. This is yet another example of just having so much fun with role-playing. Because as a player, you get to play your main character all the time, right? But then when you end up in these little weird narrative side arcs or little flashback history things, and you do these little focuses, whatever lead is getting to get that focus, you as a player get to dive in and play these fun other characters, these NPCs and extras, and you get to kind of, flex your role-playing skills a little bit, You get to have fun with it. Maybe have fun and give it a weird voice or accent or, have fun with it. But I love it. I think it's awesome because it really leans into the role play. But ultimately, you want to talk to your players pre-hand. You want to go over all the options. You want to make sure all the players are happy with the options that they have, Maybe a player is so committed to their character, they just absolutely don't want to play another NPC or supporting character during this lead's focus or narrative arc or whatever it might be at the time. In which case, maybe let them play their character. Maybe you can tie it into that flashback, the history of the lead. Maybe you can tie it into that narrative arc and still make the lead the focus, right? But let that player be their character during that other lead's focus if they're just so inclined to play their character and nothing else, in that situation. It's fine. And again, just be flexible. You're the game leader. You can do anything you want. Just, number one rule is have fun. But ultimately, you want to go over all these options with the players. Hopefully the players find something that they like, that they'll have fun with, and then you dive into it. You basically get into the story and you play it out. And let's get into that suspense and tragedy because it's important how it's played out. Like I mentioned, it's not like a normal campaign in the sense that, it's not fully determined by dice. It's more storytelling than anything because you're not relying on detrimental situations that could really F up the future of your character because this is a flashback. This is a narrative arc. This is something you're focusing on that is leading to the current state. You can't kill the main character. It'll mess it up. You see my point. So again, you're telling a story, and that's why it's all about suspense and tragedy. I love this little section here. I'm not going to read it verbatim or anything. I'm going to leave it up here in case you want to pause it and check it out yourself. You can read it in Book 3, Dearg, for yourself right there. But ultimately, it explains how you're building a story together with the players and your main lead to build suspense and tragedy. Maybe some love, just emotional moments. You're telling an awesome story, and this is a great opportunity to really lean into extreme role playing. Really lean into that suspense and tragedy, like it says here. Lean into the higher end of emotions because you're not trying to lean so much on crunch and dice and core mechanics of combat and contested sort of things. You're more so collaborating to create this story. So it's important to lean on the storytelling tools like suspense and tragedy. So that's why this is up here, because it's an important part to what these focuses are in these narrative arcs or history flashbacks or whatever they are to you in your campaign, because you're telling a story together. And it's just awesome. So there you have it. There's part 2 to the expansion rules in Dearg Book 3, all about focuses, your narrative arc. Again, I love it. It really, really pushes the role play aspect of Shadows of Esteren, and I hope you love it too. If you do, please give this video a like, leave me a comment, give me a share. If you have any questions, leave me some questions in the comments and I'll try to help you out. Other than that, make sure you check out the links in the description and you show us some love. All right, take care, everybody.
Cyberpunk Uncensored.